Hello, everybody. Drasco here from 10knorm.com, where my main mission is to normalize six-figure incomes as the minimum wage for heart-centered entrepreneurs. How do I do this? Well, number one, through the 10K Norm coaching program, and number two, through the accompanying podcast that you are listening to right now. And both of these are here to help guide heart-centered entrepreneurs that are unable to hit consistent 10K months despite all the personal development work they've done to master their mind, master their offer, master their sales, and normalize 10K months in 6 months or less. And on today's episode, we have a real talk segment where I bring in a heart-centered entrepreneur on their way towards their own 10K norm. And we have some real talk about what's currently their biggest challenge towards building their 10K norm. And in that, we're going to explore who they are, why they do what they do. And then live on the call, I get to help them get their own way on a challenge that they're currently experiencing towards their 10K norm. And today's guest, we have Liz Merrel, who is a mediator and a divorce coach with a specialization in high conflict and narcissistic relationships. She lectures regularly on high conflict divorce strategies and is a sought after speaker and podcast guest. Her understanding of the psychological and physiological reactions to trauma, conflict, anxiety, bring a holistic approach to her work with families that are caught in the high conflict cycle. And after her own litigious high conflict divorce, she saw the need for this holistic approach to divorce mediation, which included nonviolent communication skills, managing trauma, the understanding of how personality traits and personality disorders create high conflicts in a divorce. And all in all, as I've described it, we're talking to her prior to this recording, it's like humanizing this charged event of divorce. So Liz, thank you very much for being here. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm great. Thanks for that nice introduction. I'm happy to have a conversation with you, and I'm definitely curious to hear how you think about and how you coach people around this 10K norm, as you call it.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to dive into that. But honestly, before we even get to that, and I don't think I'm alone here, is I'd love for you to tell us more about, and I was not telling you this before we, press record, but, what I know about like all the stereotypes about lawyers and especially divorce lawyers. I mean, I've heard it multiple times from people that I've known that have gotten divorced. It's like the only people that win a divorce are the lawyers, right? Like that's like where all the money's funneled to, and then everybody's hating on everybody, and it's just like this like hardcore charged event. And then when I was reading about what you do and how you do it, and like nonviolent communication, which I think is such a blessing to all relationships in general, to bring that into this world, like I said at the beginning, is like, to me, it just sounds like you're humanizing this very, what can divulge into a very inhumane,
Yeah,
event. So I'd love to know how you got into that, how that came about, and yeah, anything else you want to
sure.
share about that.
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, I can talk about myself forever, so you just stop me if I go too far off the off the ranch. I um, I was in a very high conflict marriage for over 20 years. And as it turned out, it was also pretty emotionally abusive. And then I have three daughters, and they all came to me and they were like, "Mom, we think we need to get divorced." And I was like, "Oh my God, what the fuck? I need to get out of this." And I thought I was being brave, and I thought I was being strong by trying to stay in this relationship. I thought that that was the right thing to do for my family and for my kids. And when they told me that, it was really like a kick in the gut. And I was like, you know what? I need to get divorced. I am a chronic avoider of conflict, which is ironic since that's what I do now for a profession. But I realized I needed to put on my big girl pants and get divorced. So I filed for divorce, and it was horrible. It was really, really expensive. I had to take out a loan to pay for it. I'm still paying it back. And the hiring of two attorneys, although I needed an attorney, um, just really escalated the conflict. It made it a lot worse because attorneys are trained to be um, they're trained to be to support one party, you know, and they're litigious, and they can really escalate the conflict into areas where it wasn't a problem before. And that's certainly what happened in my divorce. It took a really long time. It was really expensive. We had a bunch of extra professionals that got called in, and I did mediation, which was horrible. But that planted a seed in my head when I had that mediation. We got through it, and I was like, that sucked. There was so much about that that sucked, not just the money. And I started researching, and I started reading research, and I started talking to people, and I started talking to people in the legal profession. And I realized that it wasn't that way just for me. It was that way for a lot of people. It can be prohibitively expensive. If you have children, it can make your relationship even worse moving forward into like post divorce land as co-parents. And that is not good for your children at all. And so I decided that I would try to change it, at least in my little community, and see what I could do to offer services to people who are going through divorce, who didn't want to spend an average of $18,000 per person for a divorce, who wanted to maybe spend less and maybe come out having a working relationship with your ex spouse, especially if you have children. And I started looking at mediation because my mediation was so awful. And what I realized was mediation is actually a wonderful thing. It's two parties who are in conflict just coming together with a neutral third party and looking at solutions and trying to figure them out so that you don't have to go to a judge and have the judge make your decision for you. And it can be really healing, actually. So I went and got trained as a mediator and got trained as a coach, and I can keep talking, but I'm wrapping up here soon because I want to get to the high conflict piece, because that was my experience. I thought it was just me, but as I began talking to people more, I realized that a lot of people are in relationships with a high conflict person. They're in relationships with a narcissist or a borderline personality disorder, or just generally a high conflict personality, which is sort of like an umbrella term. And I realized that the court system is not set up for high conflict divorces at all. It's really hard to find professionals who understand what that means exactly, and who know how to address the specific issues that come with divorcing a narcissist, for example, because they're very specific. And if you are married to someone with narcissistic traits, it's not just you're married to an asshole, right? Or an entitled SOB or whatever. It's a real thing, and it's on the rise. Narcissism rates are actually going up. So in particular, people who are going through that, I do a lot of coaching because they come to me for mediation, and I'm like, you're not going to be able to mediate with a narcissist. So let me help you navigate your divorce, and let me help you strategize and educate you on what this means and what to expect, and how to talk to your attorney, and how to prepare things for your attorney, how to present in court so that you have the best chance of a positive outcome for you and your children. So
Wow, that's
yeah.
I mean, I don't, I think this is actually like super cool. I actually have a lot of questions for you even before we dive into like your business, etc. So okay, I guess the first clarifying question for me would be, so you were a lawyer prior to doing this, or you just like, I'm gonna be okay, so you just went into
Yeah.
like mediation and you got trained in
Yeah.
that, plus the coaching, and
Yep.
plus all of like the understanding narcissism and all of those pieces.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
I
got
mean,
it.
I have worked um, professionally as a college professor, but in a different field for a really long time. And sort of my divorce really marked a lot, the end of a lot in my life, including my pretty much my former profession and the beginning of a new one. And I just really have like immersed myself in in training and education and really doing a lot of workshops with people and learning from them and hearing their stories. So yeah.
Absolutely. So it's more like you're trained in the school of life than
Yeah,
it is.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My preference as well. So having been in both formal and life, I would take the life any day. So okay, so that makes sense. And then what I would be curious to know more about is so, and this comes up often and kind of potentially can bleed into the 10K norm part of the segment. But oftentimes when we're experts in something, we will use terminology and things that are like technically correct, right? So like high
Yeah.
conflict people, narcissism, etc. I have some idea of what that may be, but I don't actually know if it's reflective of the depth that you understand it. So I think
Mhm.
the first part, I would love to know your kind of definition. How do you explain high conflict people or situations? How do you understand if you're in one? And then same thing for narcissism as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because a lot of times you can be in a relationship with a narcissist and really not know what's going on. You just know that you are, you're not happy, right? There's something wrong. There are red flags appearing every day as you go along. A high conflict personality is really kind of an umbrella term for any number of different kinds of people, and that can include people with personality disorders. Um, can include people who have substance abuse, and often those coexist together. They very frequently do, or someone who has some other sort of mental illness or issue, treated or untreated. And a lot of times it involves somebody who's got some of all of the above, or, more than one issue. And and so a high conflict person has those tendencies or qualities. um, they tend to see things in black and white. They tend to not be able to self-reflect. They tend to not deal with stress well. um, they tend to not have a lot of empathy. And if people are sitting there thinking, well, that sounds like a narcissist, they're right. A lot of times some people will use high conflict as a euphemism for narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissists are really hard to um, diagnose, because the very nature of that disorder means that they don't think there's anything wrong with them, and they're not likely to march themselves in to a shrink's office and say, hey, I think I'm a narcissist, can you diagnose me? They're not going to do that. So so that's something that makes it difficult to actually talk about people and classify them as a narcissist. But according to the DSM, they have to have 5 of 9 traits, and I don't have them all memorized, but they include, having a grandiose opinion of yourself, lacking in empathy. It's really kind of having black and white thinking, being really threatened when somebody or something challenges their view of themselves, because I think it's generally assumed that and believed that narcissists are that way because of something that happened to them when they were very young in early childhood. And usually it's a parent with narcissistic personality disorder or borderline, or having that been modeled in their early childhood. And it comes from so narcissism comes from a very deep fundamental lack of self-worth. So and the feeling of being unloved. And so their psyche kind of creates this shield that is the narcissism, that protects them from having to consider that, right? Because it's so painful. Like if you think that mom doesn't love you, that's too painful to acknowledge, especially as a child. So you have to create this sort of shield around you that protects you, and that can manifest in lots of different ways, including narcissism, where you think everybody is stupid and you know better than anyone else, and you need people buying into that storyline that you've created. And so there's a whole lot of terminology around narcissism, and if you do a cursory googling of it, you will come up with just a ton of stuff because it's a real buzzword right now. And there are lots of support groups around for people who are in relationships with a narcissist, even if it's not a diagnosable narcissist. People can have narcissistic personality disorder traits. So did I clarify anything for you, or did I
No,
muddle the
you
waters?
absolutely did, and it's like the perfect person to get divorced with, right? Like how could that possibly be like a hard thing to go through, right?
Right.
So yeah, I could 100% see the need for, because I think it's one thing to like require or need or want support around dealing, with a narcissistic boss or a family member or, some relationship thereof. But I think now when you're trying to sever it and there's resources at play, there's more identity threats with
Mhm,
regards to
mhm.
kids. I could see how you would need the additional support of something like what you do, especially if the overall incentive is to, from what I understand, what you do, not get lawyers involved, or if they are involved, to not need them as much. You're not bleeding as much money. It's
Yeah,
an add-on, like it's you pay to save afterwards. Like is that kind of
absolutely. You
accurate?
totally, yeah, totally nailed it. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times when I talk to people, they're like, well, I already have an attorney. And I'm like, I can help you save money even as you're paying me and an attorney, because going into an attorney's office to cry, is very expensive. Do you know what I mean? Or
Yeah,
or to rant about your ex. There are, that's why you have a divorce coach or a therapist, is so that you can talk about that stuff, you can strategize. The thing about narcissists is they're very predictable. And that's one of the reasons why, if you are divorcing one, it's a really good idea to have somebody on your team, like a divorce coach who is experienced with high conflict people or with narcissists, because um, they have patterns of behavior, and when they are threatened in a divorce, and they are threatened, right? This is like a huge conflict. um, they're they're being pitted against another person, and that kind of litigious aspect of divorce really triggers narcissists into behavior like gaslighting, which I'm sure you've heard about, or projection. They'll like accuse their partner of what they actually do, like, she's an alcoholic, she comes home drunk every day, even if she's not. Do you know what I mean? So there are certain things that you see over and over and over again in divorces with narcissists, and it's really helpful to know what they are and to build a strategy based on that, right? And to build communication techniques. I'm busy. Yeah, no, just
it's
excuse
okay.
me for 1 minute.
Real life happening, That's
Yeah, real life happening. I gotta,
good.
yeah.
All right. So as
All
we
right.
okay, we're good.
Sorry,
As
I'm
we say,
back.
as we take, yeah, that's okay. That's okay. This is the realness of the real talk segment, right? Like
Yeah,
life
yep,
happens, so
yep,
that's
yeah.
cool.
I'm a single mom. I got all my kids with me now. Um, so yeah, communication is a huge, huge piece to this. I mean, if you can get somebody to help you with the way that you respond to someone who's high conflict, you will save so much time and heartache and money. Um, and that takes work, actually. That's not something that's easy to do, because if you've been in a relationship with a high conflict person or a narcissist, you are in a trauma bond with that person. And there's another, buzzword or
Yeah.
technical term that they use, but it's like almost having Stockholm syndrome. Um, and that's why a lot of people who are in these relationships can't see that they're in them. And you develop patterns of communication, patterns of arguing, you develop these conflict cycles, and the other party's not going to willingly step out of them because that's what keeps you connected to them, is like word salad arguments, just continual, like arguing things that don't even exist over and over again, right?
Yeah,
That
because it keeps
fuels a
you in that loop.
narcissist.
Yeah.
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 And when you're divorcing that, you need to know how to disengage from that, right? And then you need to know how to deal with them when they get pissed off because you're disengaging from them, because that's a threat to them too.
That
So
makes sense. It's kind of like, and obviously I don't know your rates. I'm just throwing these numbers out randomly, but it's like, okay, you're going to pay $1,000 so that you don't end up paying 3,000 down the line, in addition to the peace of mind and sanity that you're going to get back by having somebody who is impartial and knows the patterns to get you
mhm.
to navigate these things so you can get out of it quicker with less expenditure. So that actually makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. It's something new that like I haven't actually heard about something like this. That's kind of why I'm taking a little bit of extra time to like dive into what you do and how you do it. So now I'm curious, because this is, obviously a needed thing. What do you feel like is standing in the way of your 10K norm?
Good Lord. Where to start? I think part of it, is probably what most entrepreneurs have, which is imposter syndrome, right? Like, um, who am I to XYZ, right? How, and and also having people who call you who are in this desperate state and this real, I mean, I think a lot of people who you interview are probably extreme. If they're heart centered, they're extremely empathetic. They really want to help people. They don't want to add um, to their burdens. And so, just getting past the point of saying, "Here's what I charge," you know, getting comfortable with that, and getting comfortable with asking what you are worth, right? Instead of apologetically saying, "Oh, well, my rates are this," or trying to justify it. Do you know what I mean? I think that's a big part of it. I think the sales aspect of it, and I think that's related, is challenging. Like I talk to people all day long. I have people calling me. I've got really good SEO on my website. So I have people calling me, and it's trying to trying to give them support and get them to wanting more, and then kind of closing it, as it were. I don't like to use that term, but like, how would you like to pay? When would you like to have another appointment? That piece is hard for me. Because I just want to give my stuff away in a way. I don't want to, but I end up doing that. Like, oh, that sounds awful. Well, let me give you this resource, and let me tell you, here's a financial advisor you might want to talk to, and here's a bunch of resources, rather than, if you want more, hire me. you know.
Okay.
So
That
those,
that is fair. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry, keep going. Yeah.
yeah. So those are some things, and then I think still just across the board, um, business owning, like just being a good entrepreneur, right? I mean, like all the things that go into that, in places where I'm not good. I talked about sales, but everything I'm doing by myself, right? So I had to learn how to build a website, had to learn how to do social media, had to learn how to create a Facebook ad, had to learn how to write marketing copy. I can write all day long. I can write academic papers. I can write grants. I can do all of that. But like, writing as a marketer is tricky. Learning how to network, learning where to network, learning how to, yeah, just that whole piece. I still struggle with learning how
Yeah.
to be a bookkeeper. I'm working on that now.
Yeah, I mean, welcome to the wonderful world of entrepreneurship, right? Like,
Yeah.
where you do get to experience all of those things, 100%. So there's a few aspects that I wanted to dive a bit deeper into. Um, the first one being, if somebody is struggling with what you can help them with, but you don't help them, then fill in the blank.
Then they're gonna spend more money on their divorce. They're going to escalate, they're probably going to escalate conflict with their spouse. They might get support, that doesn't work as well for them. You know what I mean? They honestly, they might hire a mediator who's not as good as me because I am such a good mediator.
So that is the completion of the statement from the perspective of the other, the person suffering. What about from your perspective? If I don't help somebody who's suffering with a problem that I can help them, then fill in the blank with regards to what's happening internally for you.
Oh, well, obviously I'm not making any money.
Mhm.
That's a big piece. I'm not building connections and community. I'm not creating a referral.
What about emotionally and mentally?
Emotionally and mentally. Um,
If I had to pass on somebody who I could help, what's
yeah,
happening emotionally and
yeah. I guess it would depend on the person because sometimes I know that I could help them, but they're not ready. Um, and it's I tend to like when that happens. I tend to sit and stew on it and like, man, I wish they'd just hire me because I know I could help them and feel bummed out, and not because of the earnings loss, but just because I know that if they would let me get in, I could change their lives. That's kind of a bummer. Um, and I try not to spend so much time, crying over spilt milk or lost fish or whatever, kind of um, phrase you want to use. But yeah, I mean, it's a big bummer.
sure. And you had mentioned at an earlier point that like, oh, like here are all these resources. Like I probably shouldn't like give you these because you're not paying me, but whatever, take them. I know you're in pain and like do it. So what's the emotion and thought process that powers that?
Um, well, it's kind of multi-layered. On the one hand, I do have a lot of resources, and I do um, want any conversation that I have with a potential client to be of service to them, right? Even if they don't hire me, I want them to have to leave our conversation empowered with something, whether it's a piece of knowledge or a resource. If somebody else who can help them, like I mentioned a financial advisor, I refer people to financial advisors a lot because that is not my field, and that's a really important aspect of divorce. Um,
And what if you didn't leave them with additional resources or value? Then what would it say about you?
I'm not sure what it would say about me, but I'm not sure I know where to go with this question. I mean, it's kind of a moot point because I do. Do you know what I mean?
Are you somebody who is okay with other people not being okay?
No, I mean, I want them to be okay. That's why I do what I do.
Okay. And if they weren't okay in your presence, how does that make you feel internally?
Oh God, it makes me sad. Yeah. Oh, can I tell you a little story?
Sure.
Kind of related to this. I had a young girl call me about 6 months ago. Just sounded so young. And she's like, I'm married and I have like a bunch, like 5 children. I'm like, dang, she sounds young for 5 children. And she said, I think I want to get divorced. But my husband told me that if I get divorced, he's going to take my children away from me. And we started talking more, and it turned out she was married to a pastor of a very extreme church, and this church under her husband's order or whatever had told her that she couldn't talk to her family anymore, and that her family was evil. It sounds like her family was perfectly nice, and they were systematically separating her from her support. They were controlling her. They were telling her, they were threatening her. And I'm like, do you realize that this is emotional abuse? And she's like, is it? And I'm like, yeah. We had this really delicate conversation, and she was telling me stuff that was just like making my hair fly off my head. It was so shocking. And I'm like, can I please help you? And then I was absolutely giving her resources, and I was telling her as much as I could. um and she never hired me. She never called me back. I followed up with her, but I don't think that she had the ability. Like, I think she might have wanted to, but she was so repressed, and in so without free will and probably brainwashed, that I couldn't give her support. And that just, oh my God, that tore me up, you know, because I couldn't help her. And I guess she wasn't ready. And a lot of times people aren't ready, like I said, but um and I think she's not alone. I mean, that was a really extreme example, but a lot of the women that I talk to in particular are being stalked digitally by their spouses. So they don't even know if their phones are being tapped, which is a thing, or they're not free to email because they know that they're being creeped on, you know? So I know I totally went off on a tangent, but when you asked how I feel when I can't help people, that's an extreme example of how I felt, really, really torn up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's two reflections back on that. So number one is I completely agree with you that it is an extreme example, and it's a very unfortunate one. The fact that these things divulge to that extreme, I think, is noble of you to want to help that. And to my second point, which is, I think your capacity to feel and to be empathetic and to sympathize and to see the layers involved and to know what's possible on the other side for these. It's like you see the good that can come from all of this. I think is pretty clear to like myself and to anybody listening of like the deep emotion and caring that you have for the work that you do, which is why there's this propensity to help as much as you possibly can. The reason why I asked specifically for your internal reaction to these things is if you are somebody who has a hard time being okay if others aren't okay, that's going to have very real ripple effects to the business that you're in.
Mm.
And to just dive a little bit deeper into that point, are there scenarios where other people not being okay and you leaving them to not be okay is actually beneficial for them?
No, that's an interesting question. I'm going to have to sit and stew on it for a minute. Let me make sure I understood what you're saying. Are there situations where people can leave our conversation?
So not even just leave, but are, I mean, potentially, like it's included in that. But is there, like, if somebody is not okay in your presence, and you just allow them to be and not give them the resources,
Mm.
unless they're paying you, obviously, is there a scenario where that's actually beneficial to the individual involved?
Oh, okay, right. So is it okay for them if I leave them without resources and not okay? Um, well, I guess it would depend on how not okay they were. Do you know what I mean? If they were like, I'm not okay because I want more from her, then that's one thing. If they're, dude, you're making me think too hard.
Yep.
um, let's see. You've stumped me. What's the
So,
right answer? I don't know.
well, actually, there is no right answer.
Oh, of course,
You
just
know,
to,
as always, it depends, right?
yeah.
Here's the reason why I A went in this direction and B why I think it's something. What struck me throughout the course of this whole conversation is like your default natural comfort zone is that of the compassionate giver, right? Like if you could prioritize giving and making sure other people are okay, I think that's where your natural
Mhm.
propensity is going to go,
Right.
right? I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that is also the perfect match for somebody like a narcissist who tends to latch onto that and generally take, as you described earlier on in the
Mm.
conversation. Would that be accurate before I go
Yeah.
on?
Hmm.
Okay. So even though it's a crappy, tango to be in, it is a perfect match. Like the bully and the victim, while
Hmm.
it's not a good thing, they're perfect matches for each other.
Right.
Okay. The reason why I bring this up is oftentimes people's strengths become their first distortions. So, what do I mean by that? Your strength is your capacity to be compassionate, be kind, be empathetic, understand, see multiple sides, right? It makes you a good mediator. The distortion of that is I can only be okay when other people are okay around me.
Oh,
Okay.
that's so deep. It's so true, though. Look at you.
I mean, it's not my first rodeo as well. So, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? So,
Yeah.
the reason why I bring that up is, and why I ask, like, is there scenarios where people not being okay actually serves their highest good? So,
Mm.
if your resources aren't being asked for, but you're volunteering them anyway, if people aren't showing the commitment that they actually want change versus just relief,
Hmm.
then your discomfort in not having other people being okay is actually further enabling and perpetuating the circumstances that produce the victimhood of the other.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they are bred from the distortion of your major strength, which is your compassion. Because sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is
Yeah.
unfortunately let people fall as
Yeah.
much as they want to fall until they realize they actually are empowered to get up. Your
Yeah.
focus needs to be on filtering the people who are empowered to get up, and you are their accelerant, their support system, their
Hmm.
guidepost to it. But everything outside of that is actually just playing into the distortion of your core quality, which is
Yeah.
the caring. So before I go on, how does that land for you?
That it's great. I mean, that's such a great insight. I think you really nailed it. Yeah. I'm gonna have to sit with that for a while. But it's true. I mean, and it's, I see this every day in playing out in different ways, like for example, with my children, right? I don't like to see my children suffer. Um,
Sure.
and I don't like I don't like it when they're unhappy. And if there's something going on, like that requires a consequence or that has a natural consequence, if I don't let them suffer that, then they don't learn, right? They don't develop. So you have to, obviously, as a parent, get comfortable with letting your kids sit in their own shit, and watching it and being like, you know,
100%. And
don't
yeah, that's
don't have to be
exactly,
like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly where I was going with it. That's exactly the same sentiment. And when, like, part of creating your 10K norm, the internal piece is going to be, first working through the discomfort of saying no when you would normally repeat to say yes,
Hmm.
and then transcending that part of yourself that honors the gift that you have, which is what makes you that good mediator, listener, compassionate individual. But coming from that aspect, not in I have to rescue everybody because then I can be worthy of that gift, but coming at it as this gift is so precious and I'm going to honor it only to the people that demonstrate that they can actually do something with it.
Yeah.
Because you are not in the relief business, you are in the change business. You're in
Yeah.
the business of somebody committed to, like I said before, and again, I don't know your rates, etc., but it's, you are committing, and you've shown me that you want to pay $1,000 so that you don't spend three, and also that you get out of this with the least amount of headache possible, right?
Mhm.
That is working with an individual who wants change, who wants resolution, who wants the accelerant of, like, out of this shitty situation that they're in. Okay.
Yeah.
So number one, internally, to continue to filter out and see those people or extract, like, because you mentioned yourself, like, they're going to go and hire a mediator who is probably crappier than I am. I
Yeah.
agree with you, but that's because your main perspective is always, how do I give so I can feel worthy,
Mm.
as opposed to come from the space of I already am worthy. This is what I
Yeah.
bring to the table, take it or leave it, in a loving way, right? Not in
Right.
a malicious way. So
Right. Yeah.
that's number one. And then number two, in that similar vein, when you're giving away all of this stuff, how much is it really worth?
I don't know. I
Well,
think
it's worth exactly what they paid for it, which is zero.
yeah, okay.
So that's the more brutal
Yeah.
answer in that case, right? Unasked for resources that are delivered to me not only in some way disrespect my free will and honor my capacity to want to rise up, right? Because, like, if I'm not asking for and showing any interest in that change versus relief, and I'm throwing resources to change, all I'm really doing is cheapening the resources of change. So I'm not even realizing that that's what they are. And I'm receiving the fact that, I'm a charity case. This is the only way that I can actually get improvement. Not
Mhm.
actually helping anybody level up. Why?
Mm.
Because you're actually stepping up into a space of, I don't even value what I have because I'm so willy-nilly willing to give it away for free.
Right.
Right? So you see how, again, it's a perfect match for individuals that want the relief and not the change. You are enabling them because you fundamentally, consciously or not, like, aren't really valuing what you support. Why? Because you're not honoring your gift in its fullest expression. So again, before I continue, how does that weigh?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of um oh, the word I'm thinking is brutal, but I don't really, that's too extreme a word. But yeah, I mean, it's like, well, kind of knocking me back on my heels a little bit, like, well, shit, I never thought about it that way, but that is a really profound um perspective. Absolutely. It's just a completely different way of looking at things, right? That I really hadn't really thought about it in those terms.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah.
Number one.
Good job.
Number two, right? This is kind of the value of having that, right? It's literally the same thing, but now shined onto you, that you do for your clients, which is
Mhm.
you have that outside perspective that isn't caught up in the day-to-day emotions and baggage that come along with these things, so that
Mm.
you can see the problem for what it really is,
Mhm.
right? So that's why it's easier for me, because I've seen this many times through
Yeah.
client work and through myself, and it shows up in the most compassionate of people, right? Like
Mhm.
they're always the ones doing the rescuing, never really doing the work to rescue themselves,
Mm.
right? So part of your path towards a 10K norm on the internal side of things is going to be, like you mentioned, healing at the beginning. This is where your healing is going to lie, right? How do I honor the inherent worthiness in myself, work from desire to actually help the people that want to be helped, and do it through the fullest, honest ownership and expression of my biggest gift, which is the compassion that I do have, but in a way that actually is monetized from love, right? Because
That
you
is
would do
what?
this, like that is monetized from a sense of love, not from a sense of I need to pay my bills.
Mhm.
Because then you're just
Mhm.
distorting your gift from lack, as opposed to building it up from, like, look at the, like, again, pay $1,000 to save $3,000. That is a very good exchange of value. Anybody would
Yeah.
write like a blank check for those kinds of returns, right?
Yeah.
But it first has to start from you owning that that is what you do, that it's okay to put a monetary value to your compassion.
Mm.
And then the actual, and this is where you begin to separate the worthiness piece, which we kind of touched on now,
Yeah.
with the actual skills piece. How do I put that into, the messaging that filters out the people that want change versus relief? How do I sell in a way that honors myself and the other person stepping up to do this, right? How do I contribute to the embodiment that this is worth as much as I say that it's actually worth,
Mhm.
right? So you got
Yeah.
the mechanics of the skill of doing the business stuff,
Mm.
repeated, finessed with the proper feedback loops to get it to that point where it really hits critical mass, separated from the worthiness piece, which you work on to heal yourself. And then there's the overlap, the combination of those that I think makes this a no-brainer for this to be your 10K norm, because it's such a needed thing in what you do. So anyway, I know I went on tangent now. How does all of
No,
that
it's
sound
good.
to you?
Yeah, it's good. I wonder, like, how I mean, I should have listened to more of your podcast to hear, you know, how this goes with other people. I mean, is this sort of like what you generally find is the case? Is this like in the same way that I see patterns all the time with the people that I work with, or do you see this similar pattern?
100%.
Yeah.
The details are unique and specific to the individual in front of me, 100%. But this general pattern of, the I am not good enough, and it's many masks, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned imposter syndrome, you mentioned fearing sales, deserving, can't say no, all of those. Like,
Hmm.
fundamentally speaking, if you just believed the truth that we fundamentally all know on some level that we are enough,
Yeah.
none of those things would matter, right? Like they would really all dissipate, right? So it's more about the masks that we wear that really fundamentally are rooted in I'm not enough,
Can I
right?
tell you something? I just interrupt you really quickly. I am writing a book called About Face that's about the masks that we wear.
Okay.
That's really
Well,
interesting that you said that.
there you know that's a synchronicity right there. But
Yeah.
yeah, it really does always come down to some mask of I'm not enough,
Mm.
right? That's always the distortion on the inner part. And then the opposite of it that I'm bringing to your attention now, and that we dive into in detail in the 10K norm program, is okay, well, if I wear masks of I'm not enough and it's expressing itself in ways that hinder me from creating my 10K norm, well, what's the opposite of that? Well, it's actually the faces of authentic expression.
Mm.
So in your instance, it's your kindness, compassion, like all of those qualities that we talked about, its authentic expression is one in strength, right? That's its authentic face. You don't have to hide behind anything. It's like, yeah, I am a compassionate, healed individual. And in this context, that has tremendous value, right? So it's
Yeah.
showing up as the positive aspect of that. And then the other part of it is the skill set. Like right now, you don't have the skill set to sell, to message, to pre-qualify, to filter, to create the offer that works, right? Have
Mm.
any, in the sales bit, how do you handle those objections, etc. Like those are all skill sets that we can build that have nothing
Yeah.
to do with our inherent worthiness,
Hmm.
but then they get distorted in that we use them as another mask to justify why we're not worthy of having the things that we want. Oh, I'm crappy at sales. I can't possibly do sales. I can't ask for money. I can't make an offer that works. They're going to go with somebody else. Those are all just aspects of like, if I had that skill set, I could do these things. And then when I combine it with the authentic expression of who I really am, that's when you get the accelerant that, as I said at the beginning, which is my mission with this podcast and the actual program, what you end up creating is a new standard that is a six-figure accepted minimum wage for heart-centered entrepreneurs, because all of me goes into it with the appropriate skill sets, and that's kind of what you get at the end. So again, long answer to your question, but
Yeah.
does that answer it?
So, like, how many people do you work with, do you think that, so we've been talking about like someone's sense of worthiness, right? And like, I actually have a pretty strong sense of my worthiness. I feel confident in, what I can offer people and who I am and what I do. And, just in general, I feel pretty freaking worthy. Um, and there's this other piece that's another layer of like, well, what if other people don't think I'm worthy? Or what do I need to do to prove that I'm worthy? Right?
Okay, so pause
Um,
right there, right?
sure. Yeah.
I inherently know, like I'm in I feel the worthiness of like what I'm doing and what I'm capable of doing.
Hmm.
Okay. If that is true, where do you need to prove it to other people?
I understand the logic of that question and I can't answer it. I don't know because like even in my I don't I don't know.
So I would say
Like
that would
even
be
in
a
my
good
last
place.
profession, I was like I was, very, I was at at the top of my game, right? And there was still like, if I fuck up, then, they're gonna know, or they're gonna think I suck, or, I mean, like, where does that come from? I don't know. Like,
So what
to
I would
know that
bring,
you're good, but also to be like worried that people think you suck.
yeah, so
What's that about?
actually that's a great question. And what I would bring to light in your instance, the distinction between skilled and worthy.
Okay, go
So,
on.
well, actually, so how do you hear that when I say it? What stands out for you? I'm skilled or I'm worthy.
So I guess I would have to ask you, like, in turn, what do you mean when you say worthy?
Great question. So I don't think you doubt your skill,
Hmm.
both in your academic profession and in what you do right now. You're, like you said, you're highly skilled. You're like, yeah, people are going to hire other people, that they aren't as skilled as me, they aren't as good as me. So you inherently believe and are confident in your skill set. But if the value that I inherently bring to that, I'm willing to just throw it away for free, give it to whoever I feel like needs it. I'm looking for validation, consciously or unconsciously, that
Mm.
other people see that value. Then it really comes down to the worthiness piece for you specifically, is you don't value the you that harbors the skills.
Hmm.
I need the other. If I give them enough stuff, maybe they'll see my worth and then they'll hire me. Or maybe you could just ask for what you know you're inherently worth and let them decide
Hmm.
what they can do. Because ultimately, if they're going to be willing to spend 3 times the amount to get divorced, they can find the money somewhere.
Yeah, right. Yes, this is true.
But that is the logical reason for it.
Yeah.
But the emotional reason for it is if fundamentally I need the validation, the proof, the distinction from the external to give permission to the skill set that I have, then it's not the skill set that's the problem. It's my perception of the me that harbors the skill set and how much that person is worth.
Right. Now I understand. I understand what you're saying. And I mean, in talking about me personally, um, on the one hand, that lands nice and square. And on another hand, it's like, actually, I do feel like I'm worthy. So now I do. And maybe it's like, as you said, maybe there's a subconscious like feeling of unworthiness in there. And I'm willing to accept that all kinds of stuff goes on subconsciously, including like feelings of unworthiness, which, is probably where a lot of anxiety dreams come from. Um, honestly.
And what I would say to
But
that, it's like, you know, while the specific statement or semantics might not be 100% accurate, like we're in the ballpark, I think that that's pretty clear.
Mhm.
It just then comes down to, especially like say in the container like this, where it's just okay, like we have like one episode and like this is what we discovered, and like you can see I need to look here. There's something worthwhile looking.
Mhm.
That's fine, right? Like your sense of worthiness might not be as I have defined it within this short context, but it's certainly related to asking for money and putting money to the worthiness that you feel like you have on some level. There's a big disconnect there. Now,
Yeah,
what the specific wording, syntax, phrasing of it is, I don't know, and it's I would say outside the scope of like this like particular
sure.
episode. But it's if it was fundamentally true in that I embody that worthiness 100%, you'd have no problem asking for money. You wouldn't give away your things, right? Like now it's the results that tell
Yeah,
a different story. And that's kind of the part that I'm illuminating to here. Because it
yeah,
oftentimes does happen. The people I speak to most are always the hidden gems. They're so good at what they do, but the world is at a disservice because they're not in a position to step up to actually do it, right?
yeah,
From that skills perspective on the business side to the embodiment of the success on the inner side, right? Now, to dive into that deeper, again, it's outside the scope of this, but that's ultimately the results don't lie there, right? Like success leaves clues, but so does non-success, right?
yeah,
And this is just one element to illustrate that. So does that kind of clear that up a little bit more?
yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I have something that's been kind of like floating around in my head, if it's okay if I bring it up and ask you. Um, and it has to do with money, like specifically. Um, and I am sure that you have a lot of thoughts on this, and I'm sure that this comes up with all of the people that you talk to. But like everyone has a different money history, right? Everybody has a different relationship with money, and from their family of origin and just how they've grown up. Like what's $1,000 to you? Is it worth, it's worth different things to different people, I would think. Um, and how does that come into play in this context of what we're talking about in worthiness? And how does that aspect of it, like your money history, your relationship with money, play out in this context of what we've been talking about? So that's one question I have for you. And another question is really a little bit outside of that, but it's about the 10K number, because I hear that all the time. Like, who's had a 10K month, and what is it about 10K that brings coaches that coaches are excited about, or use? What does it represent?
Fair enough. So two great questions. So on the first one, I would say you're 100% right. Money stories come up all the time, and I would put that in the category of the deeper detail of what we identified earlier, right? Which is I feel worthy and I'm confident in my skill set, but then there's some sort of disconnect when it comes to making money with it and
Mhm.
charging the right price and what I'm worth, etc. So yeah, in that space somewhere is certainly going to be a money story, because this is really at a broader sense a issue of receiving and the worthiness to receive. And
Mhm.
as givers, we're more comfortable giving rather than receiving. One
Mhm.
of the ways we count how much we receive is through money.
Yeah.
So in this instance, when you look at your results, how much I'm willing to receive is directly proportional to how much is in my bank account. So obviously that's going to translate back to the money story. So I know it's kind of a non-answer to your question, but just within the context of this container, it was more about
Yeah.
like illuminating the major things. So by all means, if you want to dive into that further, offline, I'm more than happy to. But this was more about seeing the broad picture
Sure.
and
Yeah.
orienting ourselves. Okay, for people that hear and see themselves in it, this is a good place to look. We've just kind of given it an outline of how it manifests for you.
Mhm.
And then on the second question, yes, I agree with you. There is this like magical, 10K number, which is kind of why I branded myself that way. Um, I have my own reasons with regards to like why I went down that road. Some simple, some not. But I think what's more important in the way that I handle the 10K norm and like materializing that in 6 months or less is like I am agnostic to how you need to do that. Meaning your 10K norm is your 10K norm. I don't care if you want to work with one client a month that you charge 10K for, you want to work with 10 that you charge 1,000. I'm not one of those coaches that's like, well, you just need a webinar, and like if you have people in the webinar, you'll do this. Like if you like to do webinars, cool. If you don't, we'll figure out what works for you. But people
Mhm.
are often blinded to it, by kind of like I have to do it this way. So that's one aspect. But the deeper answer to your question is, I define 10K norm when I work with people by what actually lights them up. It's their desire that's going to move them towards that higher version of themselves. It's not on me to define what that looks like for you.
Mhm.
If you don't know how to define it, it's on me to help guide you there. But that's a completely different story altogether. So does that, answer at least in part your question?
Yeah, yeah. So my first question about like money stories, yeah, it wasn't really a question, I guess, as much as like, here's a thing. Um, eh, yeah, let's just acknowledge it and talk about it a little within the scope of what we're doing here. Um, and then the second one is, yeah, I mean, that was not, I'm just curious because like, why is that a magic number? I mean, and for me, it would be magical if I could make $1,000 a month, right? I mean, I'm literally making almost no money. And I'm certainly everything that I'm making, I'm pouring back into my business. So yeah, I mean, I get that that's like a wonderful goal that would be incredible. Um,
Absolutely. And that's kind of like with regards to like my reasoning, you know, that is why the domain name was available and I thought it was good. So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
kind of like the practical reasons. But how I got to even searching that domain name is that milestone, I think, is the first milestone that any entrepreneur, but especially in this instance, like when you hit that milestone, you now have options available to you. It means you've
Mhm.
proven your offer, you've proven your commitment to reach out and build out of that audience or do whatever you need to do to actually get it. You've learned the skills of honoring, yourself, navigating your own emotions through it, embodying that, and
Mhm.
you've gotten to it. Now you have options, right? You want to stay there and just like live life there, cool. You now have all the skill set, your life can be comfortable, you have more options. If you want to begin to scale and build a team and do all of the other business things, that is the first milestone to hit to be able to
Mhm.
do those things. So for
Yeah.
me, both in my previous businesses and in general, that was like the milestone that gives
Yeah.
me the freedom to choose where it is that I want to go. So that's a bit of
And
a,
what was your previous business?
so I owned a brick and mortar weight loss center for 10 years, closed that down at the beginning of 2020, moved into doing online funnels and marketing for other online coaches, and then
Oh,
realized it's one thing, like I don't want to really build an agency. Like I'm making good money here, but it's not what I want to do. Want to get back into coaching. I did a whole lot of my own personal healing in that time, and then decided on like this is really now the purpose that I'm passionate about.
yeah.
Just combining all of the coaching work, all of the inner work with the skill set of marketing that I have into 10K Norm. So that's kind of my path
Nice.
through this whole
Yeah.
thing. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's about that. So I just want to be conscious of time, and if the big picture kind of makes sense to you and it feels complete, we can certainly close it off here. If there's something outstanding, we can certainly address it. So how do you feel with regards to everything?
I feel good. I mean, I honestly, I feel like I could talk to you for, we could find stuff to talk about all day, um, because you have a lot of really great insight. Do you know what I mean? And I can tell that you've done a lot of work, um, to get to where you are with that insight. And it's, I think what you're doing is really cool. And I think that doing this podcast and allowing other people to listen to it, and reflect on their own, like where they are in relation to what we've just talked about, would probably be super duper helpful.
Well,
So,
thank you, because that
so
that
good
is
job. Yeah, I mean,
the essence of it. So I appreciate the fact that it has surfaced. So definitely thankful to you to coming on, having this conversation, allowing me to do what I do. So then just to close it off, why don't you let everybody know, you know, what's the best way to contact you? Who's the best person to contact you? All that good stuff. We'll close it off with that, and the floor is yours.
sounds good. Okay, people can find my website at www.openspacemediation.com. And you can email me at liz@openspacemediation.com. And those are probably the best ways to find out more about what I do and how you can work with me and what kind of free resources I have available on my website. And yeah, I,
Awesome.
yeah,
Well, we're going to include all those resources in the show notes. Obviously, people will have access to that. But yeah, I just want to thank you for coming on, having a great conversation, a lot of insights, and thank you very much.
yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. This was fun.
Awesome. No problems. And for everybody else, we'll see you guys on the next one.